Let me bring in our News Nation political panel. John Rosenthal, founder and chairman of Stop Handgun Violence; Shira Toeplitz, politics reporter for the Capitol Hill newspaper Roll Call; and Democratic strategist and MSNBC contributor Jimmy Williams. Shira, let me start with you. You heard Congresswoman Spears say that this would be the death knell, she believes, for the Republican Party. The president was asked today who the American people would blame, and essentially says that perhaps there would be enough blame to go around. But the bottom line, this is not about new debts, new spending. This is about, as laid out by the president today and others, paying your bills.
Right, and I think the White House has really struggled when it comes to messaging in the first term, when things like this, legislative, really complicated battles. The president in his news conference this morning had a very clear message. I think he's really improved on this by saying, you need to pay your bills. If you can't go out to expensive restaurants like the average, relating it to the average American family, you have to go to less expensive restaurants. These are bills Congress needs to pay. However, I would go back just a little over a decade ago to when Bill Clinton was president and the government did shut down. Who got the blame for that? It was congressional Republicans. And that's why it's interesting that congressional Republicans this time around have taken such a hard line, saying we're ready to go, we're ready to let the government default if we don't get more spending cuts.
So what do you believe is the strategy there, knowing what has happened when you look at history, and not very distant history, Shira?
I think that's frankly all Republicans have to bargain with at this point. They are bargaining, and when the president was at the podium today, he essentially said, "Your move, Congress, come up with the next idea." But generally, that's all they have. They have the majority in the House, and in that case, it's not a very controlled caucus. It's a very fractured caucus. You have Democrats controlling the Senate and the White House. They don't have a good bargaining position here again. All they can do is appeal to their base and the American people that they want more spending cuts.
Jimmy, Congresswoman Kathy McMorris, a Republican, was quoted on Politico as saying, "I think it is possible that we would shut down the government to make sure President Obama understands that we're serious. We're always talking about whether or not we're going to kick the can down the road. I think the mood is that we've come to the end of the road." With that kind of talk from Republicans in the House, will anything get done?
I think, listen, they're going to have to come up with some kind of agreement. If they don't, then in fact her premonition will come true, and parts of the government will shut down. Listen, you have an echo of different Republican leaders that are out there saying that the theory of a government shutdown would not be such a bad idea. So they're setting this up. They're trying to desensitize what would otherwise be a pretty calamitous thing for the economy and for the country.
And we heard the same thing with the fiscal cliff from
yes,
quite honestly, some progressives who were even on this show saying, let's go over the cliff. How bad could it be?
Absolutely, yes. People on the left were saying exactly the same thing. And what I think is going to happen here is they're going to come to some sort of short-term agreement, and they're going to wait for the president's budget, which is due out, I think, the beginning of February, less than a month. And so, listen, the Republicans are setting this up. They're teeing it up for a government shutdown. The question is, will they actually pull the trigger? Shira's right. In 1994, or whatever year that was, that did not work out so well for them. They took a huge hit, and if you don't remember, Newt Gingrich had to resign soon thereafter. So this is not their track record on this doesn't bode well.
All right, and John, let me bring you in on the conversation. As I mentioned, you're the founder and chairman of Stop Handgun Violence, and you've been on with us since the Newtown tragedy a month ago, and now the president is saying later this week we will hear more specifics from him, likely to include some kind of assault weapons ban. And at the end of last week, that came as a surprise because you had folks who believe that with the NRA saying that legislation, even though they don't vote, they obviously have great influence over those who do vote, would not make it through the House.
Yeah, Tamara, it's amazing. Look at the terminology, dead on arrival, death knell. 87 Americans die every single day from firearms. And it doesn't come as any surprise to the majority of your viewers that the system is broken in Washington, and partisanship and self-preservation of their elected office is more important than the business that they've actually been elected to do in Washington. But when you think about this issue, I mean, 26 and 7-year-olds killed. I mean, since Newtown, another 800 Americans killed from guns. And the Congress is saying that a ban on assault weapons and a background check for all gun sales is just too radical when 87 Americans die every day. The system's broken. all these members of Congress have been sort of trained to do. I mean, remember, there are congresspeople, we put them there, but now they're more concerned about the threats from the NRA. If they vote for common sense gun violence prevention laws, they might face a challenger, which might mean they get voted out of office and they no longer have their free health care and free travel. I mean, this is truth is stranger than fiction. It's a public health crisis in this country, and they're saying that the debt ceiling is more important than 87 dead Americans a day, including 3,000 Americans every month. That's the equivalent of a 9/11 every month. And these cowards in Congress can't put public safety in front of self-preservation of their own office.
You know, it's interesting, this group today called Sandy Hook Promise. Some of the victims' families and survivors and first responders had their press conference this morning. They want to be included in this conversation on gun control legislation. But even, John, in that community, the most recent for us to witness something of this level of mass killing, there's a divide on even what to do next. And they are, if you're going to continue to use the analogy of what happens, you know, on 9/11, they're the ground zero, if you will, for the latest massacre. And in our nightly news report, we saw even there's a divide on what is the likely next option, John.
You know, Tamron, there's always going to be special interests, and Wayne LaPierre from the NRA is paid, I don't know, over $1 million a year to say anything. Wow. But the fact that our members of Congress are so intimidated or purchased and owned by the NRA that they won't stand up for the majority of Americans. And by the way, no one has a gun to Congress's head. This is voluntarily being held hostage in order to continue to collect the NRA and gun industry, the unregulated gun industry's blood money campaign contributions. And shame on Congress, and shame on us for not holding our Congress accountable.
Shira, let me bring you in and back to the issue of accountability. And I can't go back enough to the statement from David Keene, the president of the NRA, saying that he does not believe an assault weapons ban would go through Congress. But some of the proposals we're expecting from the president, which John touched on, would include a universal background checks on all gun buyers, and also the White House not backing off on a new assault weapons ban, with the president saying consult your conscience, with some of the stats that John also pointed out, and with this new groundswell of people who are gun rights advocates backed by mayors, backed by Bloomberg, with his millions of dollars in influence. In fact, they're out with a new ad today. Where does this leave members of the GOP, even those in red states?
Right. So there are some members of Congress, Republicans, many of whom are in the South from conservative areas, that will not vote for anything that at all looks like a restriction on gun rights. They just won't vote for it. There's some Democrats, a few of them as well. To pass any kind of legislation on gun control through Congress, what the president and gun control allies are going to need are about 20 or so Republicans in the House to come on board, make way for any Democrats who jump ship and decide they can't vote for the legislation. And then they'll need every Democratic member of the Senate to come on board, plus a couple more Republicans to get through filibuster. So they need 60 there. Those are tall orders. Yeah. And right now, it doesn't seem like an assault weapons ban. I haven't done a whip check myself, but it doesn't seem like an assault weapons ban like that would have enough votes. Background checks so far seems like a much more palatable thing to members of Congress. They might be able to reach those margins with something to do with that.
And Jimmy, do you agree with that? Are we looking at background check, and then, as the president again alluded to, looking at some options that he can move through with executive action?
Well, you know, I'm not sure what the president's power is with regard to executive action. Right. I have no idea. But when it comes to the Congress, Shira is dead on. You just don't have the numbers in the House. There is no majority. The majority to move, frankly, any kind of gun control. In the Senate, you have to look at who's in cycle, especially on the Democratic side. And let's be brutally honest about that. There are 4 or 5 Southern Democrats or red state Democrats that are up for re-election as we speak, and they are not going to want to take these tough votes. And so it's very hard to get it through either chamber, frankly. I think what you get is a very watered-down bill, which is sad considering what happened in Newtown.
All right, Jimmy, thank you, Shira, thank you, and John as well. And up next, the other piece of legislation the president